are the psychological threats to a successful punter? And James is going to start us off and give us some ideas, the theories, and Hugh's got some examples. So let's start off, James, if we can, with the recency bias.
Right, all these things are a family of what we call irrationalities, Enzo, which are ways that we've been hardwired to think by evolution, but actually affect our ability to make probabilistic judgment. So that is when we're betting. And to deal with the first and most important of them, recency bias. When we were obviously in caves, being attacked by lions and things, we had to pay very close attention to recent information, such as to save our lives. And over the course of evolution, the same instinct has been hardwired into the way we react to things and with the way that we interpret data. And so we tend to pay far too much heed to things that have happened recently. Now, betting markets are based heavily on recent information. Now, I'm not discounting the importance of recent information by dint of the fact that it is more relevant than older information, but markets tend to overemphasize it in the odds. And so I always say that even if you knew nothing about, say, Serbo-Croatian volleyball, you could bet on it. You'd have a much greater chance of making a profit if you just ignored recent results and you looked at teams or players in terms of their overall statistically significant performance. So this is one of a family of biases which are based on the same thing, which are that recent evidence is only a small sample and that we should base our judgments on the longer term.
Okay, it's interesting. I mean, one example we came up upstairs was the football game I was talking about on Monday night. I fancied Arsenal to win at Reading, and I was speaking to a friend of mine on the way home, and he was saying that, how could you back Arsenal, having the fact they couldn't beat Bradford the previous week, a League Two side, how could you back them at odds-on to win at a Premier League ground to win at Reading? And he couldn't get out of his head the fact they didn't win against Bradford the previous week to see them winning the following week.
And you've linked me seamlessly into the second of those biases, and they're ranked in order of importance, which is the availability bias, or what psychologists call the availability heuristic, which is the way that we find it the easiest to think. And that things that have made a psychological impact on us tend to stay in our memory far longer and be weighted far more heavily than they should. So say, as you said, your friend goes to see QPR play and they get beaten 13-0 by Reading. He would then find it more difficult than he should to back QPR the next week. But if he'd seen Reading get absolutely thrashed by Liverpool, he may be able to base his judgment on a less emotionally responsive small sample. He'd be better off if he looked at those teams in terms of what they've done over the last season or the last 32 games. So the availability heuristic is basically the overweighting of things that we have a disproportionate reaction to. So that can be in horse racing, say, impressive winners, or it can be horses that win famous races on the television, horses that appear in the papers all the time, horses that are flagged up on the television. Things that distort our ability to take a broader view. Now, becoming aware of these things is a long way towards curing yourself of them.
Okay, Hugh, I know you've got some examples of things. James mentioned how you can relate it to horse racing. Now, I saw a horse win a novice hurdle by 10 lengths. I'm going to back him next time out, but he might be running in a handicap and he might not find it so easy.
Yeah, I mean, the market does overreact to what has happened very lately. I think in terms of recency bias, personally, I felt there was an example of that the international at Cheltenham the other day, because it's a big race trial for Cheltenham, the bookmakers send their representatives to the track, and they're going to react, and they're possibly slightly weighted to react in a fairly dramatic way because they know they'll get more column inches if they do. But Rock on Ruby was racing on very, very testing ground for the first time in his life, and his trainer had expressed concerns. Ran okay, possibly as if he slightly needed the run, and he was pushed out to 12-1. And I felt that was an example of the recency bias in action, in that he was a most impressive winner of the champion hurdle. And there's a couple more examples if we look here. I feel that sometimes the SPs of overseas raiders in this country are often influenced by whether or not recent raiders have done well. A good example of that might be Wesley Ward at Royal Ascot recently, where the first runner, certainly I think the first runner he ran was a big price, or maybe the first 1 or 2, and then as soon as 1 or 2 had run well, the ones that he subsequently ran were much, much shorter prices.
And switches on there, just explain.
Yeah, switches. When horses switch stables, this is something I keep quite a close eye on because it can be a way of finding value bets. And the stables who traditionally do well with horses that they've acquired from other stables. If they've had one that's won recently in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I tend to find that the next one, the next qualifier for that particular system, is much shorter, because people remember the last one.
You say that, and people automatically think, I've already thought like Lordy Hill, Tim Vaughan have just jumped into my head because of when you've said joining them from other yards. They're two names that just automatically people think of.
But if they go 5 or 6 without having a winner, the market tends to forget about it to a certain degree, and all of a sudden one will pop in at 12 to 1, 14 to 1, something like that. So again, I think that regardless of the overall pattern, just 1 or 2, 3, 4 races can make a difference to the way that the market perceives their chances.
Okay, that's a very interesting thought there on the recency bias. Just going back to the availability bias and the cognitive bias as well. I mean, we've got a few examples. Any other practical examples of the availability bias? Let's go back to that one. I mean, I think that's a very
the availability bias. People, you'll sometimes hear a racing presenter say something like, I was at Lingfield when such and such happened, and you're waiting on the edge of your seat for them to say, and he played up really badly in the paddock, and therefore, or something that is more pertinent than just the bare result. And it never happens. It always just, for some reason, they think that the fact that they were at the track and saw it, that's a classic example of the availability bias, where it comes back to their memory more readily because they were actually present. And I think it's a trap that we can all fall into. We see something happen and we remember it, rather than looking in a dispassionate way at the overall data. Similar thing. How can anybody back a novice chaser at short odds? If there's an odds-on favourite in a novice chase who falls, everybody notices it. Everybody says
the ones that win by 10 lengths, nobody talks about.
Absolutely, and everybody says, "Oh, how could anybody have possibly backed that? It should be that price to jump round," or some other such nonsense. And in fact, if you look at the overall data again, backing odds-on if you're going to back an odds-on horse, you're probably as well backing it in a novice chase as anything else. Overall, you probably won't make money, but you'll lose less money than backing any other overall subset of odds-on favourites. Outside of 3 wins again, same again.
We notice it when it happens.
Yeah, I mean, there was a brief blip last year where the outside of 3 did very well, but again, I think that was just a spike, just noise. Overall, the outside of 3 tends to represent poor value. Everybody homes in on it. All 3 horses are focused on.
I think we had an example of that actually. Plumpton on Monday. We had the race that Bally, what was the horse that Jonathan Geeks won, and Captain Tids was second, and the outside of 3 Wishes or Watches was 12 to 1. It was massively out of the handicap, but a lot of people would have backed it, thinking 2 even money joint favourites and a 12 to 1 chance. Well, how many people threw a 5 or a tenner on the 12 to 1 chance, thinking I'll back the outsider of 3 here?
And if it had won, I guarantee you, people on the TV and wherever else and on the course would have been saying, there you go, outsider 3 wins again.
I would have said
but
that,
nobody ever says, look, the outsider 3's been beaten yet again.
It was beaten miles. It was beaten after about 3 fences. So.
And they're never neglected in the betting, because as you say, there is always somebody who will try and bet them, and that's reflected in their price. And the other one I was going to say is, as an example of kind of the groupthink that can happen, the availability bias. If we hear something repeated often enough on TV or in books or anything like that, for instance, that it's hard to defy a penalty in a bumper. I've heard this umpteen times over the years that I've been following racing, and I did some research on that, and there's no, in actual fact, it turns out that horses that are carrying a penalty do quite well. Certainly over the time span I showed, I think they showed a tiny profit even. So it's just one of those things that gets repeated, and because it gets repeated over and over, it's readily drawn to mind. And when you're looking
at your head,
it's the first thing. It's the first thing anybody says when they look at a bumper. Oh, it's hard to, if you see something that's already won. Well, it's not easy to defy a bumper in a penalty in a bumper.
You're true. I mean, you always discount those automatically. You think, oh, it's double penalty, 1-1. No, I'm not backing that one. So it does happen so easily. So we'll come back to James here to talk about the confirmation bias and anchoring as well. Our next 2 topics.
Yeah, these are both examples of when something earlier in your thinking is hard to remove from your thinking. Confirmation bias is basically our general, as human beings, our general tendency to look for things that agree with things we already think, that confirm our preconceptions on things, and that's just a basically human. I told you so is the confirmation bias. I knew Arsenal were eventually going to get beaten because of the way they played, or I knew that Tony McCoy would eventually go off too fast, given how aggressive he is on horses. And then you tend to then re-weight that impression in your future thinking, because we all have this sort of egotistical need to feel that we're right.
Yep.
And then similarly, anchoring is just anchoring any general probabilistic impression of something by something you started off thinking. So say, for example, somebody tells you, it's one of these terrible trends people, tells you that 5-year-olds can't win the champion hurdle. It's very hard to rid that from your estimations when you're looking at horses who come up that are 5 that have got a great chance, like that one of Alan King's that won. Cheltenham's a foreign country to me, but I do remember that one. And the Montjeu.
Catch it, yeah.
Catch it, yeah.
Catch it, yeah.
So both these two, and the point about all these biases is that by raising your own awareness of them, it serves a twofold purpose. One, you understand how you think and how irrationalities creep into your own thinking, but more importantly, you begin to understand more about markets, how markets are formulated, why horses are short the prices that they are, and that's fundamental in actually working out which horses are the right ones to bet.
Okay, we'll get some more examples from Hugh in a moment or so, but we're just going to pop back to Lingfield for now.